The echoes of scuffling feet bounced off the concrete walls of the parking garage. Wesley Grant's fingers tightened around the wooden handle of his push broom, his eyes narrowing at the scene unfolding 20 yards away. 3 men in black tactical gear surrounding a woman in white, her blazer and pencil skirt pristine against the dingy gray of the garage. Her designer handbag clutched tightly to her chest. Vivian Black, the CEO whose heels had clicked imperiously through these halls just this morning, now backed against her luxury sedan, her composure cracking for the first time. Wesley's mind calculated distances, angles, vulnerabilities, habits from another life. The nearest attacker lunged for Vivian's arm. In one fluid motion, Wesley flipped the broom in his hands, the wooden handle becoming something far deadlier than a cleaning tool. Just a janitor, they'd called him. They were about to learn how wrong they were. In the fluorescent glow of the underground parking garage, Wesley Grant moved through his daily routine with the same methodical precision that had once guided him through hostile territories. At 38, his tall, muscular frame still carried the disciplined posture of his military days, even as he pushed a cleaning cart between the rows of executives' luxury vehicles. The standard-issue gray uniform of the maintenance staff hung loosely on his broad shoulders, but underneath, he wore an olive-green military undershirt, a small connection to the man he once was. His handsome face, weathered by experiences few could imagine, remained stoic as he swept away the day's debris, his movements economical and purposeful. The basement parking garage was his domain now, a far cry from the classified missions that had once defined his existence. But Wesley had made peace with this life. It gave him what he valued most, stability for his daughter Maisie. Every evening at 6, Wesley would hang up his maintenance uniform, drive his modest sedan to Oak Ridge Elementary, and transform back into the role that mattered most, Dad. Tonight was no different, as 8-year-old Maisie bounded down the steps of the after-school program, her backpack bouncing against her small frame, her eyes lighting up at the sight of her father. "Dad, I got to be lab assistant today," she exclaimed, climbing into the car with the boundless energy that never failed to brighten Wesley's quiet world. He smiled, the expression softening the hard lines of his face. "Tell me everything, scientist," he replied, his deep voice gentle in a way reserved only for her. As they drove home to their small but tidy apartment in the outskirts of the city, Maisie filled the space with animated stories of classroom experiments and playground politics, while Wesley listened with the attentiveness he once applied to mission briefings. Their evening ritual unfolded with military precision. Homework at the kitchen table, dinner prepared together, and then their special time, 30 minutes of reading before bed. Tonight, as Wesley tucked the blanket around Maisie's small shoulders, she looked up at him with curious eyes that reminded him so much of her mother. "Dad, Tyler says his dad was in the Army too, but he tells stories about it. Why don't you ever tell stories?" The question hung in the air, innocent yet cutting straight to the heart of the carefully constructed wall Wesley had built between his past and present. He gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Some stories aren't for telling, sweet pea. But maybe someday." He kissed her forehead and turned out the light, knowing the partial truth of his words. Some stories weren't for 8-year-old ears. Some memories were better left in the shadows where they belonged. After Maisie fell asleep, Wesley moved through the apartment with silent footsteps, checking locks and sightlines out of habit. His neighbors in the building knew him as the quiet, dependable single dad who fixed leaky faucets and helped carry groceries. Mrs. Abernathy next door often commented on his such good manners and occasionally tried to set him up with her niece. What they didn't know was that he could disarm a man in 3 moves, or that he slept with a tactical knife within reach. Mrs. Abernathy noticed him more. They didn't know about the nightmares that sometimes woke him, drenched in sweat, reaching for a weapon that was no longer there. They didn't know about the wife he had lost, Julie, whose smile he still saw in their daughter's face. For 4 years since her death from an unexpected aneurysm, Wesley had lived half a life, existing primarily for Maisie and finding purpose in the simplicity of their routine. The morning brought news that rippled through the maintenance staff at Blackwood Enterprises. The CEO herself would be conducting an inspection of all company properties. Wesley listened to his co-workers' nervous chatter as they hurriedly polished floors and wiped down surfaces that hadn't seen such attention in months. "She's a real ice queen," muttered Collins, who had worked security for 10 years. "Brilliant as hell, but cold as winter. Called the whole board functionally obsolete last quarter and fired 3 VPs in one day." Wesley simply nodded and continued his work. Executive drama meant little to him. He had seen enough real conflict to know that corporate politics were just elaborate games played by people who had never faced actual life or death stakes. At precisely 10:45, the executive elevator doors opened, and Vivian Black stepped into the basement level, flanked by 2 assistants frantically taking notes on tablets. At 34, she had already built Blackwood Enterprises into one of the most formidable technology firms in the country. Her reputation for strategic brilliance matched only by her exacting standards. Her white blazer and skirt were impeccably tailored to her slender frame, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized her sharp cheekbones and intense brown eyes. Wesley watched from the periphery as she inspected the facilities, her gaze missing nothing, her questions precise and penetrating. There was something in the tightness around her eyes that spoke of exhaustion, carefully concealed, a weariness that her pristine exterior couldn't quite hide. Wesley continued his work, becoming nearly invisible as executives often rendered service staff. He swept methodically near the elevator banks, close enough to observe but not so close as to draw attention. He noticed how Vivian's assistants flinched when she pointed out inadequacies, how the maintenance supervisor stammered through explanations about budget constraints. He also noticed how she listened, truly listened, despite her intimidating demeanor. When she asked about staffing levels and safety protocols, there seemed genuine concern beneath her businesslike tone. As the inspection group moved toward the security office, Wesley rounded a corner and nearly collided with a small figure who had wandered away from the after-school tour group that occasionally visited the building. "Whoa there," Wesley said, steadying Maisie by the shoulders. His daughter looked up with wide eyes, clearly not expecting to find her father here. "Dad, I was looking for the bathroom and got lost, and then I saw you," she exclaimed, her voice echoing slightly in the concrete space. Wesley knelt down, automatically scanning for the rest of her class. "Your group is upstairs, sweet pea. How did you get all the way down here?" Before Macy could answer, the click of heels announced Vivienne's return. She stopped, taking in the scene of the maintenance worker and the small girl. "This area is restricted," she said, her tone clipped. Then, noticing the familial resemblance, her expression shifted slightly. "Is this your daughter?" Maisie, never shy, stepped forward with the confidence of a child who had been taught her own worth. "I'm Maisie Grant. My class is touring the building because we're learning about businesses. Are you important here? You look important." Wesley watched as surprise flickered across Vivian's face, quickly replaced by something softer. "I'm Vivian Black. I run this company," she replied, her tone gentler than it had been all morning. Maisie's eyes widened. "You're the boss of everything? Even my dad?" When Vivian nodded, Maisie beamed. "That's so cool. Girls can be anything. That's what my dad always says." For the first time that day, perhaps longer, Vivian Black smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face from merely beautiful to radiantly human. The unexpected moment was interrupted by a frantic teacher calling Maisie's name from the elevator. Wesley quickly explained the situation, assuring the flustered woman that his daughter was fine. As Maisie rejoined her class, she waved goodbye to both her father and the CEO, completely unaware of the impression she had left. Wesley turned to find Vivian watching him with curious eyes. "You've raised quite a remarkable young lady, Miss Grant." "Wesley Grant. And thank you, she's the best of me," he replied simply, then added, "I should get back to work." Vivian nodded, her professional mask slipping back into place, but not before Wesley caught a glimpse of something wistful in her expression. As she walked away, white handbag swinging gently at her side, Wesley returned to his broom, pushing away the unexpected connection that had briefly brightened the subterranean space. The inspection concluded late in the afternoon. Wesley watched from a distance as Vivienne dismissed her assistants, instructing them to take the elevator up while she made a phone call in privacy. She walked toward her reserved parking space, white designer handbag clutched in one hand, phone in the other. Wesley was emptying trash bins when he noticed 3 men entering the garage from the service entrance. men who didn't belong to the maintenance or security teams. Something in their purposeful stride and the way they scanned the area triggered Wesley's dormant instincts. He set down his trash bag silently, observing as they spotted Vivian and began moving toward her with too much intent to be coincidental. Vivian was unlocking her car when the first man approached. Wesley moved closer, still appearing to be working but tracking every movement. He heard the man ask for directions, a common ploy, and saw Vivian's brief annoyance as she glanced up from her phone. The moment she registered the threat, it was almost too late. The other two men had flanked her, one grabbing for her arm while another reached inside his jacket. "Get in the van or this gets messy," the first man hissed, gesturing toward a dark vehicle idling near the exit ramp. Vivian's eyes flashed with fear and defiance as she clutched her white handbag to her chest like a shield. "I don't know what you want, but we want you to shut up and come quietly," the man interrupted, reaching for her. What happened next unfolded in a blur of precise violence that had once been Wesley's daily reality. The push broom in his hands became a staff, then a battering ram, then a precision instrument. He crossed the distance in seconds, driving the wooden handle into the first attacker's solar plexus, with enough force to fold the man in half. As the man dropped, gasping for breath, Wesley was already moving to the second attacker, redirecting the man's reaching arm into a joint lock that ended with a sickening crack. The third man managed to draw a weapon, a stun gun, but Wesley's foot connected with his wrist before he could deploy it, sending the device skittering across the concrete floor. A precise strike to the throat left the third attacker choking and disoriented. In less than 30 seconds, all three men were incapacitated on the cold concrete floor. Wesley stood protectively in front of Vivian, his breathing controlled, his stance ready for any additional threats. The training that had lain dormant for years had reactivated without conscious thought, muscle memory taking over when needed. He scanned the garage, ensuring no other attackers lurked in the shadows, before turning to Vivian. She stood frozen, her white outfit somehow still immaculate, her eyes wide with shock and something else. Recognition that the quiet maintenance worker had just revealed himself to be something else entirely. "Are you hurt?" Wesley asked, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Vivian shook her head, unable to find words as she stared at the three men groaning on the ground and then back at Wesley. "We need to call security and the police," he continued, already reaching for the garage emergency phone. His movements were efficient, his report to the security desk clear and concise, giving their location and the situation without emotion or embellishment. As sirens wailed in the distance, Wesley turned back to Vivian, who had recovered enough of her composure to straighten her blazer and take a steadying breath. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just the maintenance guy," Wesley replied, already stepping back, retreating into the shadows of his anonymous existence. Before she could question him further, security personnel flooded the garage, followed shortly by police officers. In the chaos that followed, Wesley gave his statement with minimal detail, describing what he had seen and done in the most ordinary terms possible. He mentioned his self-defense training and acting on instinct, but volunteered nothing about his military background. As the police led away the handcuffed attackers and paramedics checked Vivian for injuries, Wesley slipped away, clocking out at the end of his shift as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He picked up Maisie from school, made dinner, read stories, and tucked her in, the sacred routine that anchored their lives continuing uninterrupted. But as he sat alone in the quiet apartment later that night, cleaning his tactical knife out of habit, Wesley knew that the carefully constructed wall between his past and present had begun to crack. 3 days passed with no mention of the incident from management. Wesley went about his duties, sweeping floors, changing light bulbs, and fixing minor issues throughout the building. If he occasionally felt eyes on him or noticed security personnel watching him with newfound respect, he gave no indication. On the 4th day, as he was checking the emergency exit lighting in a seldom-used stairwell, the door above him opened and Vivian Black descended the stairs alone. She had traded her white ensemble for a dark blue dress, but her presence was no less commanding. "Mr. Grant," she said, stopping a few steps above him. "I've been looking for you." Wesley straightened, setting aside his toolbox. "Ms. Black? Is there a maintenance issue I can help with?" A small smile touched Vivian's lips. "I think we're past that pretense, don't you?" She descended the remaining steps until they stood on the same level. "I did some research," Special Forces, 3 tours, Distinguished Service Cross, and now you're changing light bulbs in my building." Wesley's expression remained neutral, though inwardly he tensed. "It's honest work." Vivienne studied him with those penetrating eyes. "The police report says you subdued 3 armed men using a broom. The security footage was more revealing. You could have killed them all in seconds." It wasn't a question, but Wesley answered anyway. "That wasn't necessary. Containment was sufficient." They stood in silence for a moment, each measuring the other. Finally, Vivienne spoke. "I need someone I can trust. Someone with your particular skill set. My security team failed spectacularly last week, and the police investigation suggests this wasn't a random kidnapping attempt. Someone targeted me specifically." Wesley shook his head before she could continue. "I'm not for hire, Ms. Black. Not in that capacity anymore." Vivian's expression hardened slightly. "I'm offering you triple your current salary to act as my personal security consultant for 1 month while I identify who's behind this. You'd work regular business hours, only... I understand you have a daughter." Wesley hesitated, thinking of the tuition bills for Maisie's school, the tight budget that left little room for emergencies. Still, he shook his head. "I left that life behind for a reason." Vivian's carefully controlled facade slipped, revealing a flash of genuine vulnerability. "Please, I haven't slept since it happened. I keep seeing their faces, feeling their hands." She stopped, composing herself with visible effort. "I don't trust easily, Mr. Grant, but I trusted you the moment you stepped between me and danger without hesitation." Wesley looked away, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have helped." Vivian laughed, a short, humorless sound. "We both know that's not true. 20 people work in that garage. Security cameras show at least 3 others who saw what was happening and did nothing." She reached into her purse and handed him a business card. "Think about it. Call me by tomorrow if you change your mind." That evening, as Wesley helped Maisie with her math homework, his mind kept returning to Vivian's offer and the fear he had glimpsed beneath her composed exterior. Maisie, perceptive beyond her years, noticed his distraction. "Dad, you're thinking so loud I can hear it," she said, poking his arm with her pencil. Wesley smiled, focusing back on the fractions worksheet. "Sorry, sweet pea, just work stuff." Maisie tilted her head, studying him with eyes so like her mother's it sometimes took his breath away. "Is it about the lady in white, the one who runs your building?" Wesley's surprise must have shown on his face because Maisie rolled her eyes. "Amber's mom works in the office upstairs. She told Amber that you saved the boss lady from bad guys." Wesley sighed, making a mental note about workplace gossip reaching elementary schools. "It wasn't quite like that." Maisie closed her math book, giving him her full attention. "But you did help her? When she was scared?" Wesley nodded reluctantly. "Yes." Maisie considered this, her small face serious. "And now she needs more help?" Wesley raised an eyebrow. "How do you know that?" Maisie shrugged. "Because she looked scared when I met her. Not on the outside, but in her eyes. Like Mrs. Abernathy after her husband died." The simple observation, delivered with a child's unfiltered honesty, hit Wesley with unexpected force. "She asked me to help her for a while, but it would mean changing my work schedule." Maisie thought for a moment, then nodded decisively. "You should help her, Dad." When Wesley started to explain the complications, Maisie interrupted with the devastating clarity only children possess. "Mom always said helping scared people is what makes you special." Wesley fell silent, remembering Julie's words from years ago, after he had intervened to stop a mugging outside a restaurant where they were celebrating their anniversary. That night, she had looked at him with pride and said those exact words. Somehow, Maisie had absorbed that moment and carried it forward, a living connection to the woman they had both loved. The next morning, Wesley called the number on Vivian's card. Her assistant put him through immediately, as if his call had been expected. "I'll do it," Wesley said without preamble. "But I have conditions. I work 7 to 4 so I can pick up my daughter from school. I maintain my maintenance position as cover, and I'm not carrying a weapon in the building." There was a brief silence on the line. "Agreed," Vivian replied, her tone businesslike but with an undercurrent of relief. "Can you start today?" Wesley looked down at his gray maintenance uniform, thinking of the changes this decision would bring to the careful life he had constructed. I already have. For the first week, Wesley shadowed Vivian discreetly, observing her routine, identifying vulnerabilities, and assessing potential threats. To the outside world, he remained the maintenance worker who occasionally fixed issues in the executive suites. But his eyes missed nothing. Not the rivalry between Vivian's CFO and COO, not the resentment from the board members she had recently overruled, not the strange timing of her assistant's phone calls. He compiled mental notes on everyone who approached her, categorizing them by risk level and possible motives. Vivian, for her part, maintained her icy professional demeanor in public, but began to show glimpses of the woman behind the executive facade when they were alone. In her office after hours, reviewing security protocols, Vivian surprised Wesley by asking about Maisie. "She's quite extraordinary. You must be very proud." Wesley nodded, allowing himself a small smile. "She's everything good in my life." Vivian hesitated, then asked, "And her mother?" The question hung in the air between them. Wesley looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the city lights below. Julie died 4 years ago. Aneurysm. No warning. He could have left it at that, should have, professionally speaking, but something compelled him to continue. She was a kindergarten teacher. She loved puzzles and rainy days and terrible sci-fi movies. She laughed at all my jokes, even the bad ones, especially the bad ones. Vivian was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry for your loss," she finally said, the corporate platitude somehow genuine in her voice. Then, offering something in return, "My parents were rarely present, physically or emotionally. Success was the only acceptable outcome in our house. Failure meant disapproval, which was worse than punishment." She traced a finger along the edge of her desk. "I built this company to prove something, I suppose. Now I'm not sure what, or to whom." The confession, unexpected and unguarded, created a fragile bridge between them. Two people who had armored themselves in different ways, against a world that had taught them painful lessons. As days turned into weeks, Wesley found himself drawn deeper into Vivian's world, a landscape of power plays, strategic maneuvering, and constant performance. He watched how she navigated board meetings and investor calls with brilliant precision, her mind always 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. But he also saw the toll it took, the long hours, the rare moments of doubt when she thought no one was watching, the lonely dinners ordered to her office at 9 p.m. Once, arriving early, he found her asleep at her desk, vulnerable in a way that made something protective stir within him, a feeling he had reserved exclusively for Maisie since Julie's death. Their professional relationship developed a rhythm, punctuated by moments of unexpected connection. When Vivian's car service was delayed one evening, Wesley offered to drive her home. The 20-minute journey passed in comfortable conversation about books they had both read, cuisines they enjoyed, places they hoped to visit someday. For those brief minutes, they were simply two people, not employer and employee, not CEO and former soldier. As he pulled up to her elegant townhouse, Vivian hesitated before opening the door. "Would you and Maisie like to come in for dinner sometime as a thank you?" The invitation hung between them, laden with possibilities neither was ready to acknowledge. "Maybe someday," Wesley answered, his tone gentle but establishing a necessary boundary. The investigation into Vivian's would-be kidnappers hit a dead end with the police, but Wesley's own careful observation began to yield disturbing patterns. The 3 men had been hired muscle with criminal records, but no clear connection to Vivian or Blackwood Enterprises. However, their attack had coincided perfectly with a momentary gap in the security camera footage, a gap that could only have been orchestrated by someone with inside knowledge of the building's systems. More troubling were the financial irregularities Wesley discovered while reviewing the company's security budget, discrepancies that pointed to someone skimming substantial sums right under the board's collective nose. Late one night, after Maisie was asleep at Mrs. Abernathy's apartment next door, Wesley returned to Blackwood to access security footage that wasn't available remotely. The offices were dark and silent as he made his way to the security suite, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. He didn't expect to find Vivian still in her office. the blue light of her computer screen illuminating her face as she pored over financial reports. She looked up, startled by his appearance. "Wesley, what are you doing here?" He explained his suspicions about the security breach and the financial discrepancies, watching as her expression shifted from surprise to focused calculation. "Show me," she said, rising from her desk. Together they reviewed the evidence Wesley had compiled, the tampered footage, the suspicious transactions, the timeline that suggested coordination and insider knowledge. "Someone close to you is involved," Wesley concluded, watching her face carefully. "Someone with access to both the security systems and the financial records." Vivian's face paled as the implications sank in. "That narrows it to 4 people, including my CFO and head of security." Her voice remained steady, but Wesley could see the betrayal cutting deep. This was more than a physical threat. It was a violation of the carefully constructed world she had built, through years of strategic brilliance and relentless work. "What do we do?" she asked, and the question struck Wesley with its significance. Not "what do I do," but "what do we do?" A partnership formed in crisis. "We set a trap," he replied, already formulating a plan that would draw out the traitor without putting Vivian at further risk. "But first, you need to act normal. Give no indication that you suspect anything. Can you do that?" Vivian straightened her shoulders, her momentary vulnerability replaced by steely determination. "I've been playing corporate poker since I was 25, Mr. Grant. I can certainly manage a convincing bluff." Her use of his surname, a step back to formality, was a reminder to them both of the professional nature of their arrangement, despite the personal trust developing between them. Over the next 3 days, Wesley and Vivian executed their plan with precision. She announced a fabricated breakthrough in the company's quantum computing division, a development that would dramatically increase Blackwood's market value once made public. The information was shared only with the 4 suspects, each told in confidence with slightly different details that would serve as fingerprints if leaked. Wesley, meanwhile, enhanced security around Vivian while appearing to maintain routine. The trap was baited. Now they waited for someone to take it. The betrayal came faster than either expected. James Harrington, Blackwood's CFO and Vivian's mentor from her earliest days in the industry, made a series of encrypted calls to an offshore number, followed by unusual movement in his personal investment accounts. "I can't believe it's James," Vivian said quietly as they reviewed the evidence in her home office, away from the corporate environment that might have ears. "He recruited me out of business school. He backed me for CEO when the board wanted someone with more experience." Wesley watched as she processed this betrayal, her analytical mind trying to make sense of the personal hurt. "People's motivations change," he offered. "Financial pressure, resentment, opportunity. Sometimes it's a perfect storm that pushes someone to cross a line they never thought they would." Vivian looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Is that what happened to you? A perfect storm that pushed you out of one life and into another?" The question was unexpected, cutting closer to Wesley's carefully guarded past than he was comfortable with. After a long silence, he answered, "In a way. After Julie died, I couldn't reconcile the man I was in combat with the father Maisie needed. Every mission, every kill, it all seemed so distant from the bedtime stories and lunchboxes that became my world." He hadn't spoken these words aloud to anyone, yet they flowed naturally in the quiet sanctuary of Vivian's home, under the weight of her own vulnerability. "So I walked away, traded one kind of service for another." Vivian nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. "We all have our breaking points, the moments that force us to choose who we really are." She reached across the table, her hand briefly touching his, the first physical contact between them that wasn't professionally necessary. "Thank you for choosing to help me find mine." The final confrontation came sooner than they had planned. Wesley was picking up Maisie from school when he received an urgent text from Vivian. "Harrington wants meeting now, says it's about security breach, coming to office." Warning bells immediately rang in Wesley's mind. The confrontation should have happened on their terms, not Harrington's. "Sweet Pea, change of plans. We need to stop by my work for a bit," he told Maisie, who was buckling her seatbelt. Her eyes widened. "Is it the lady boss? Is she in trouble again?" Wesley managed a reassuring smile. "Just a work thing. You can show me your art project in the car." As they drove, Wesley called Mrs. Abernathy, arranging for Maisie to stay with her if necessary, while mentally preparing for whatever might await at Blackwood Enterprises. When they arrived, the executive floor was unnaturally quiet. Wesley instructed Maisie to stay in the break room with her backpack and snacks, promising to check on her every 15 minutes. Then he made his way toward Vivian's office, his senses heightened, aware of every sound and movement around him. Through the glass walls, he could see Vivian seated at her desk, facing Harrington, whose back was to the door. Their body language was tense, confrontational. Wesley approached silently, close enough to hear their voices through the partially open door. "You've built something remarkable, Vivian, but you've grown too powerful too quickly. There are interests that find your ethical stance inconvenient," Harrington was saying, his tone almost regretful. Vivian's eyes flicked to Wesley as he appeared in the doorway, but she gave no other indication of his presence. "So this isn't about money, it's about control?" she asked, keeping Harrington's attention focused on her. The older man shrugged. "Money, control, they're two sides of the same coin. The attempt in the garage was regrettable but necessary. You were meant to be frightened enough to step down, not kidnapped. Those idiots got overzealous." Wesley had heard enough. He stepped into the office, closing the door behind him with a soft click that made Harrington whirl around. "Mr. Grant," the CFO said, his surprise quickly masked by a professional smile. "This is a private meeting." "Not anymore," Wesley replied, moving to stand beside Vivian's desk. "We know about the security breach, the financial diversions, the offshore accounts. It's over, Harrington." The CFO's facade cracked, his genial expression hardening into something cold and calculating. "You have no idea what forces you're dealing with, maintenance man. This goes beyond one company or one CEO." His hand moved toward his jacket pocket, and Wesley tensed, ready to intercept a weapon. Instead, Harrington pulled out his phone. "One call, and not only is Vivian's career over, but your daughter, Maisie, isn't it, will find her father suddenly of great interest to certain government agencies. Your dishonorable discharge wasn't as buried as you think." Wesley froze, the carefully constructed story of his past crumbling under Harrington's smug revelation. He had never told Vivian the full truth, that his last mission had gone catastrophically wrong when he disobeyed a direct order to save civilians that his commanding officer had written off as acceptable collateral damage. The military had buried the incident to avoid scandal, but Wesley had paid with his career and nearly his freedom. Now somehow Harrington had unearthed this secret. Beside him, Vivian stood slowly, her expression unreadable as she processed this new information about the man she had trusted with her life. The moments stretched, taut with unspoken implications, until a small voice broke the silence. "Dad?" Maisie stood in the doorway, her backpack clutched to her chest, eyes wide as she took in the tense scene. "You said 15 minutes, but it's been 22. The sight of his daughter, innocent, vulnerable, the center of his reconstructed life, crystallized everything for Wesley. In one fluid movement, he closed the distance to Harrington, disarming the threat not with violence, but with quiet, immovable certainty. "Make your call," he said, his voice low. "But understand this. There is nothing I wouldn't do to protect my daughter. The man I was before, he's still here, right beneath the surface." Harrington paled, recognizing the lethal promise in Wesley's eyes, the look of a man who had faced death and dealt it in equal measure. But it was Vivian who took control of the situation, stepping forward with the composed authority that had built her empire. "It's too late anyway, James. While you were threatening us, the board was receiving evidence of your embezzlement and corporate espionage. The police are already on their way." She held up her phone, displaying an active call to her head of legal. "I learned from the best. Always have contingencies for your contingencies." Harrington's face contorted with rage as he lunged toward Vivian, but Wesley intercepted him with practiced ease, subduing the older man with a simple joint lock that brought him to his knees, just as security personnel flooded the office. In the aftermath, as police led Harrington away and security secured the building, Wesley found himself standing in Vivian's office with Maisie pressed against his side. Vivian knelt to eye level with the little girl, "You were very brave coming to check on your dad," she said gently. Maisie nodded solemnly. "He always checks on me when I'm scared, so I check on him too." The simple statement brought an unexpected tightness to Wesley's throat. Vivian smiled, a genuine, warm expression that transformed her face. That's what people do when they care about each other. They show up. Her eyes lifted to meet Wesley's, the words carrying a weight that went beyond the moment. Later that evening, after the statements had been given and the immediate crisis contained, Wesley sat with Vivian on a bench outside the building, watching as the city lights began to illuminate the darkening sky. Maisie was inside with Vivian's assistant, enjoying the executive break room's hot chocolate machine with the delight only an 8-year-old could muster. "Were you going to tell me?" Vivian asked quietly. "About the discharge?" Wesley looked down at his hands, calloused from tools rather than weapons these days. "Eventually. Maybe. It's not something I'm proud of." Vivian was silent for a moment. Disobeying an order to save innocent lives seems like something to be proud of, actually. Wesley turned to her, surprised by her understanding. "How did you know that part?" Vivian smiled slightly. "I have resources too, you know. I did my own research after you saved me in the garage. Your commanding officer was later investigated for multiple ethical violations." She hesitated, then added, "You're a good man, Wesley Grant. Better than most I've known." The compliment, delivered without agenda or expectation, settled something restless within him. "Does this mean my consulting job is over?" he asked, attempting to lighten the moment. Vivian laughed softly. "I think we're just getting started, actually, if you're willing." The ceremony was modest. No press, no speeches beyond what was necessary, just a quiet unveiling at a local community center. A plaque, simple and clean, mounted on the wall beside the front entrance. The Julie Grant Scholarship Fund, for the children of those who serve, in memory of a life lived with love. It was Vivienne's doing. No press release, no corporate branding, just a check written in silence and a name offered with reverence. The fund would cover tuition and supplies for children of veterans, the kind of kids Julie used to teach, the kind she would have fought for. Wesley stood beside her, his hands loosely clasped behind his back. He didn't speak much that day, but he didn't need to. The weight in his chest had shifted, not lifted entirely, but softened. Maisie tugged gently on his sleeve, pointing to the framed photos of the first scholarship recipients inside the center's lobby. One of them had drawn a crayon thank you note. She found that deeply important. Later that afternoon, Wesley returned to the apartment and opened a box he hadn't touched in years. Inside, a few medals, a photo of Julie, his old field watch, still scratched at the bezel. He didn't bring them out to relive the past. He brought them out to release it. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Vivian stopped by with grocery bags and a dish she insisted was homemade. Wesley didn't ask if it was. Macy set the table with quiet pride. 3 plates, not 2. No one labeled it a family, but something unspoken settled into the room like warmth in winter. No grand declarations, no dramatic gestures. Just 3 people choosing, in their own quiet ways, to show up for one another. And for the first time in a long while, that was more than enough.